Into the deep of the woods, there is something rarely seen, almost unknown, witnessed as rare as a lunar eclipse on a starlit night. At different times of the year, their voice can be heard, their tracks sometimes found. They live in the mountains and are considered to be the boss of the mountains, greater than the cougar, the moose, the black bear, and the grizzly. To most of the world, they have been spoken of as being only a legend or just a well-constructed hoax. But to 3 young explorers, these creatures become reality. Could there really be a North American ape? Red lights flash and a siren blares as Sergeant Baxter hurriedly drives to a 911 call on Eastside Hill. It was a different type of night, chilly, as fog was floating over the town's bridge. This was an unusual call. Not like there was any real danger that ever happened in the small wooded town of Highland. Most people kept to themselves. Mrs. Bolts was anxiously waiting by her front door as Baxter pulled into her driveway with dust heaping behind his car as he came to an abrupt stop. Exiting his car, he left his police hat sitting on the passenger seat.
"What's the matter, Mrs. Bolts?"
said Baxter. He could see a stretch of fear across her face. I, she stammered, trying to get the words out. "I saw something, Sergeant, behind the house." Unable to mask the fear in her eyes, she continued. "I saw a very large shadow near my garbage cans. It was tall, and whatever it was, it smelt like rotten garbage." And
"Hold it, Mrs. Bolts. Calm down," said Baxter, cutting her off. "A what? By your garbage cans? Smelled like..."
Mrs. Bolts was an elderly woman who got sometimes overly excited about things that really meant nothing. Yet Baxter wondered why she was so upset this time. "You'd better go in and sit down for a minute," said Baxter, shaking his head and feeling slightly embarrassed of the commotion he had made in his race to get to her home. "I hope this isn't one of those not-so-important calls," said Baxter to himself. They both went in and sat down at the kitchen table. "I know what I saw," continued Mrs. Bolts. "It was something strange." She placed her nervous hand on the table. "I never seen anything like it before in all my life." "Are you sure that you're not taking some kind of bad medicine or something, Mrs. Bolts?" said Baxter. "No," she insisted. "The smell was like something dead or rotten like garbage." "Do you have garbage cans that need to be dumped, Mrs. Bolts?" said Baxter with an unbelieving grin across his face. "Sergeant," Bolts continued, "won't you at least go and see if there is anything still there?" Her hands still slightly shaking with fear. Okay, Mrs. Bolts. I'll go grab my flashlight from the squad car and go have a look." Baxter headed into the backyard with his flashlight beaming, but it didn't last long, for the batteries were almost dead, and the light beam began to fade. "Oh, shoot," he said. "These dumb batteries are almost dead." Just then, Baxter tripped over something sticking up from the ground. "Ouch!" he said. He had bashed his leg into a steel horseshoe stake. As he stood there rubbing his leg from the pain, there was an abrupt movement about 12 yards out in the woods. the sound of crunching leaves and snapping branches. Something large was moving away from Baxter. He tried to shine the flashlight into the darkness where the movement came from, wondering if it could have been a moose or a bear. Walking closer to the forest edge, he knew that he could not go in any farther without proper lighting. Just then, through an open window, Mrs. Bolts spoke gently.
"Sergeant, did you see anything?"
"No," he said, "but I heard something moving quite quickly through the woods. Maybe a bear or something else, but whatever it was, it's gone." He walked up to the window and said, "And I really think I'm going to need a Band-Aid."